Alright, so this is gonna be kind of a weird recording. Um, basically, after after finishing up chapter 5, both regular and Snowgrave, I kind of went even further off the deep end with theories and stuff than I did in the middle of my playthrough. To the point where my theories have more or less completely changed in general, and I wanted to kind of state that, but so much got changed that I really don't see I really don't see it being possible to just be like, oh yeah, this is what's different now in like a quick little 5 minute thing. I get the feeling this is gonna take like 2 to 3 hours. So I wanted to just try and explain how my theories have changed, what they are now, and all that stuff relative to the events I've seen and all that. Um, Something I also should mention is when I say like my theories, I mean that literally. Like these are theories I have from me playing the game, and like I'm not going in and digging in forums and seeing what general consensus is and all that stuff. I kind of did that at first, but then I got mainly because even as of now, I have not even been a fan of Undertale as a series for a year. It is the beginning of August right now as I'm recording this, and it was not until late August last year that I became a fan of the series. So pretty much anything I say or do, I always just assumed people knew more than me. I always just assumed that, oh, if the community says like, oh no, you're fucking wrong on this, that's correct because I've been here for so little. I was not. I've not been here the same length that most of you guys have been, and I always just assumed everyone was fucking smarter than me or knew more than me about all this. Not like because I'm stupid or anything, just because like I figured these guys have been fucking with this game for significantly longer than I have. They probably know what they're talking about. One of the main things. Well, this is, I'm getting distracted immediately by how. What the fuck is going on here? Like, I know I have a movement mod installed, but goddamn. One of the things was that I thought, like I said, I thought everyone knew more than me, and I thought like all these things were confirmed, and like everything I was saying that the people were telling me was wrong was like, oh yeah, they just know more than me. It's just wrong. I'm just wrong. And then I found out something that kind of pissed me off a little bit about the community, and that is that Toby Fox is one of the most aggressively hands-off developers ever. He pretty much goes out of his way to never answer any questions about like theories or lore or anything like that. The most he does is like, hey, oh by the way, I'm really glad you like Flowery because I've had this character fully planned out since 20 fucking 16. So, like when people told me, the main one that people told me that I just assumed I was wrong and kind of just went with it was the one I actually brought up at the beginning of my chapter 5 playthrough, where I thought that Chris and the Soul were the same entity and were just severed for some reason. And everyone was like, no, completely separate. They're not the same at all. Not even remotely related or similar. Chris is its own thing. And the player is their own thing. So I kind of just went with that. And then I found out that is not in any way, shape, or form confirmed. That is just the most popular theory, and that technically speaking, there has not been any information one way or the other whether or not that is true. So, I'm going to be going back to making the assumption that Chris and the player are the same entity, and just for some reason, they are severed. So I'm going to be viewing Chris and the player as severed entities instead of separate entities like I feel like 90% of the fan base does. That is something that's important, because that's another reason I want to discuss these, just so that it's a little bit easier to understand where I'm coming from with the way I talk about this game and stuff. And just how I react to all that stuff. Is that I want people to be able to understand where I'm coming from in this stuff, so that way when I do something that's like, this doesn't make sense, why are you doing this? It hopefully makes a little bit more sense. So, with me viewing Chris and the player as the same entity but severed instead of separate, that's the biggest one. That is definitely the biggest one that I think people... That basically needs to be said. How do I do the dive again? There we go. Did I run up this? Oh, okay. I'm getting distracted by how much movement I have. Are you serious? Okay. Alright. I wasn't expecting this. Okay. Can I hit the water? Yep. Alright, but... So, that going forward... I do want to make it clear that all of my theories are my own. It's not me just copying someone else's theory, or if I have heard someone else's theory, if I say that it's like, I agree with this, it's because I actually went into the game itself and checked it. I went to see how well it held up from my own experiences with it, and that's why a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is just my own experiences with the game. So if like I say something that's like, oh, why didn't you know about this scene? It's probably because I just missed the scene. Like, I don't like just looking at the wiki page and having it tell me how the thing works. I know in some cases you kind of have to with Deltarune, because of things like how Toby Fox is hiding extremely lore relevant details based on character reactions. I should get inside. After that lightning bolt. After, like, how Noelle has had reactions to every single item that has been added into the game ever since Chapter 2, despite the fact that she never has a chance to interact with them, even to the point where there was a new ring weapon in Chapter 5. And so it's stuff like that, it's like, well, I don't know how to fucking data mine or anything like that. And even though it's probably something I could just look at the files for because of how Deltarune, what kind of game Deltarune is, it's not really something that I still even remotely would know how to easily do. So for stuff like that, I do unfortunately have to use the wiki. But for the majority of what I'm talking about is my personal experiences with what I have seen in game. That being said, I can finally start talking about theories. Unfortunately, it's not Deltarune theories yet. I have to start with an Undertale theory because it sets the stage for the rest of them, which that's kind of another thing I want to be clear about. I will... Is that, fuck, I immediately got distracted. Oh, right. I don't want these theories. I'm going to try and explain these theories in a way that they fit together and make sense together, as if like they were all conjoined and all flow into the same thing. Do not look at them that way. I am just doing that to try and make sense to how to get all of these to work together. A lot of these, pretty much all of these theories I have separately. To where I just kind of view like, oh, this is this. Now how am I gonna try and connect it to the rest of this stuff? And that's what I'm doing with this. So for this first one, because of that, trying to connect it to everything else, I do have to start with explaining a theory I have about Undertale. And that is who the player is relative to the lore of Undertale. Now, something about the player that always kind of felt weird to me relative to Undertale and Deltarune was that how much... Oh, that's funny. He holds up the heart. How much the player really seems to not get along with Chris in Deltarune, but then how much they get along with Frisk in Undertale. I thought that was weird. So I started thinking about it more, and with some of the stuff that was going on in Undertale, mainly how, like, you get told, basically how the conversations in Toby Fox's bullshit works, to where he likes to, he is very careful with his words. And usually whenever any character says something, it's alluding to something else, or like he doesn't just throw words around. So with that, I was looking at some of the stuff with that, like how when you name your character, how it's Chara's name and not Frisk's name, and you don't learn that your name is Frisk until the end. And I thought that was a little bit weird. So then I kind of just asked, like, what if that wasn't the case? Like, what if the reason that doesn't make sense is because you aren't Frisk? So then I came up with the theory that based on the fact that you have the same name as Chara at the end of the game, and that Chara is soulless, and that your soul just kind of fits into Frisk without any problems or fighting or whatever, what is actually happening is that the entire time the player has been Chara, both in body and soul. But like in Deltarune, for some reason, well, not for some reason, in Undertale was pretty much directly stated what happened. Basically the body and soul got separated. But in Undertale, the body got corrupted, where, as in the soul didn't really have, these guys immediately respawn. The soul didn't really have anywhere to go back to because of the body being corrupted and becoming, like, evil and twisted by hate and all that shit. And becoming just the insane eldritch psychopath murderer that was Chara. So, but I think that, basically a lot of stuff that, like I said, I am bad at talking, so I am probably not explaining this anywhere near as good as I need to make this make sense. Basically, it feels like to me that the soul of the player in Undertale is supposed to be Chara's soul. It's supposed to be like as if we were the child that fell down and became siblings to Azrael. And that was us the entire time. And what happened to Frisk, and the reason we can control Frisk's body without Frisk fighting back or really doing anything unique on their own, is because, and this part is one of the reasons I kind of don't like this theory, is that Frisk is dead. Frisk basically died upon impact with falling down into the crater, but because no one was there when Frisk died, they were just able to move on. They were just able to die like anyone else would when it's their time, I guess. Leaving Frisk's body empty. Not being corrupted by hatred or anything like that, because Frisk just, even though Frisk died in a tragedy, Frisk died peacefully. So then at that point, the player, Chara's soul, which had just been wandering around, ends up finding the body first before anyone else does, and kind of just starts puppeting it. Not to be like evil or malicious or anything like that, but because the player would know, or I forgot a part of it that was important, god fucking damn it. The player would know about what happened to Azrael if they were Chara's soul. But the reason that the player doesn't know is the part I forgot about, which is that I think that when a soul is separated, the way that Chara's soul was separated, to where it's like an unnatural separation, the emotions go with the soul and the memories stay with the body. And that is why we have certain reactions. Well, not why we have certain reactions, but it's how our reactions fit into the lore of things. Where we're supposed to react a certain way. Like, probably one of the best examples is with Azrael at the beginning, or I guess technically Flowey is still at that point. Pretty much the only two options for how you react to how Flowey operates in the beginning of the game is to either trust him and be like, yeah, I'll let you shoot me with these friendliness pellets, or to avoid the bullets because you don't trust him. And that that matches up with the soul has the emotions but not the memories, because you would have the emotional connection to Azrael of being Azrael's sibling. So he would be someone that you loved. He'd be someone that you cared about. He'd be family. So he'd be someone that you wanted to trust, that you wanted to help out, that you wanted to listen to. But at the same time, you are also aware of what happened to Azrael. You are also aware of him becoming corrupted and killed by the humans and all that. So while you do want to trust him, part of you doesn't, which is why I missed. Which is why you have the things like which is how the idea of not trusting him and avoiding the bullets comes from. Your only two reactions at that point are either, why are you not talking to me? Are either to trust him or to not trust him, and considering how you would be connected to him if you were his brother, or sibling. I keep forgetting not everyone, and not everyone is me. Those reactions make sense. Like, it makes sense for your only two reactions to be the first time seeing your brother, who was one of the most important people in your life. It is raining super fucking hard in the game right now. Suddenly appearing is that you either just immediately want to trust him again and just go back to being brothers with him, or you don't trust him and you have to avoid him. And then from that point on, whatever your reactions are based on just what your reactions are. I think it's also why the characters are built up certain ways. How many stars do I have in this fucking course? Oops, wrong. Oh no, I did the thing. I think I might have to exit course. Oh no, I did the thing bad. I might have fucked myself. I don't care about you. Yeah, I need to... I think I might need a reset. But from that point on then, any reactions you have are just your genuine ones. Pretty much the only character you would know is Toriel and Asgore. The reason that theory is kind of important to the rest of the ones I have, and why I needed to take this time to explain it first, is that I don't actually think Deltarune and Undertale are fully separate. Did I seriously not... Did I unlock the Chain Chomp and then just not fucking grab it? Why is that one still green? Oh. Oh, the two fucking stars I'm missing are probably this one and red. Yeah, red coins is I think the other one I missed. Oh wait, no, that's a 6. So this one should be got, right? Yeah, that one's already got, so that's gonna be a little bit confusing. I can't fucking remember where all the stars were in this game. But the reason I think that's important, and with them, with Undertale and Deltarune not being separate, I think they are like a proper sequel. And the reason why is not really a thing. I don't really have that good of a reason other than a gut feeling. Fuck. I'm getting so confused and off topic. This is why I wanted to do it with this, so that way, at the very least, me playing the game could hopefully be entertaining enough to where me trying to stumble through and remember what the fuck I want to say, it doesn't be sidetracked too much. But yeah, I don't really have that good of a reason for why I think that Undertale and Deltarune are the same universe, other than just my own thought process. Ow. It's really also hard to explain all of these stuff, because like some of the stuff makes more sense with the information I have, but because I have it all at once and I'm trying to explain it in a way that does not have it all at once, it's really hard. It's really, really hard. But basically, I think that what Deltarune is not really an alternate universe fully. It's more of an alternate timeline. Basically, what I think happened is that at the end of a true ending... So at the end of a true ending in Undertale, you and Azrael have a moment together where you fucking reconcile, and you just say like, hey, everything's forgiven, I hope to see you again more, but you have to say goodbye at the end. And I think that because, you and Azrael are siblings, and you do love each other, you want to be able to spend more time together. I'm not even remotely, nope. But the only time you can spend together is when you do the game. It's when you play through that, and then even then, all you get where you have like a proper moment as brothers again, as siblings, is the ending, where you essentially just have to say goodbye. So then I think what Deltarune is after one of those endings, something approached the player and Azrael at the end of the world, and essentially said that it can help us. Like it can allow us to have the world. It can allow us to have a world where we actually got to properly spend time together, where we actually got to be siblings, where we actually got to grow up together and not have any of the tragedy or anything like that pull us apart. And whether or not... Am I speeding up? Whether or not you would think that, like, hey, is this really fucking suspicious that someone would just approach you in a location that supposedly only you and Azrael should access as the people who have knowledge of saving, of timelines and all that stuff? It would be suspicious. There would be reasons for not trusting it. But at the same time, that wouldn't really matter. Because you and Azrael just want to be able to spend more time together. You want to be able to grow up properly as siblings. So you take the entity up on its deal, but at that point, I think it was Azrael was soulless but had a body, and the player was just the soul without the body. So what I think happened then is that Azrael was trying... Another reason why I think you guys would want to kind of... Why the player and Azrael would want to try and take the entity up on its deal is because when they reset the world, as Azrael points out, you're kind of screwing everyone else over because you're kind of risking them, and considering that both the player and Azrael, assuming that, well, you're intended to be a good person, but I guess that really goes player to player. If you get to the true ending, I guess it's safe to say that you're probably at least attempting to be a good person. So you would notice that, like, you can't keep having these meetings, you can't keep meeting up with Azrael, with your brother, without risking everyone else, and that's not really something you want to do. So when this entity comes out and says, like, hey, I can help you with this, I can let you guys rebuild the world so that you can be siblings, you kind of just, even without fully trusting the entity, or even if you do fully trust the entity, because another thing is, since the player is meant to be an actual character in lore and not just like, oh, I'm just controlling this guy, the individual player's actions kind of do shape the world a bit, to where you kind of have to build the story and make assumptions based on how the players are actually going to react. So, like, in lore, the players talk to each other. The players do, they are aware of what everyone else is doing, because that's how it works in real life. You have to make those connections and assumptions because that's how big of a scope of including the player as an in-lore, in-world character is. And that can kind of get very confusing at times, so kudos to Toby Fox for doing this. Especially, like, I think he's handling it very well. I think, are you fucking kidding me? I think he is handling this very well, and this massive scope of this. So with the players' reactions in mind, there wouldn't really, like, the reason we would trust the entity is the same reason we would start up a genocide run, or why we would do Snowgrave, or why we would talk to the same NPC like 60 times. Because even if you don't trust the entity, in addition to wanting to be able to grow up with Azrael, you're curious. You want to see where this goes. You want to see the next game. So the player and Azrael take the deal. And at first, everything seems fine. Azrael's rebuilding the world, you're getting your body rebuilt, and that's what the vessel segment is at the beginning of the game. It's you getting your body rebuilt as the universe is being rebuilt. Which leads into the entity tricking you. Because no matter what you do, no matter what you make, it tells you your choices don't matter, and that you're actually Chris. And that is why I think that whatever this entity is, it has a bigger plan for Chris specifically, and I think Azrael is also involved. Mainly because Azrael keeps getting brought up. But I think that whatever this entity is another entity that, like Azrael and Chris, operate outside of normal confines. Azrael and the player, technically, if I have to specify the player at this point. Oh, I didn't mention. I should probably clarify. When I am talking about... it's kind of hard to describe Chris and the players as, like, individual things. So if I say Chris, I mean the body. If I say us or the player or we or anything like that, I'm talking about the soul. It is a little bit confusing for that. So for basically, we got tricked while Azrael was... Am I dead? While we were rebuilding the world. While Azrael was rebuilding the world, to try and be as close to the true ending as possible, but allowing us to be siblings. It's why pretty much everything is happening the same way as it looked like it did in the end. Why Torio's still a teacher, why Torio and Asgore are still divorced. Because we didn't just make a new world with all this stuff. We took everyone's souls with us. we allowed them to come with us to try and bring them into the world with us, to try and let them have this, as we saw, world where it's not bad. Like the monsters get forced on the ground. Everyone got to be living upstairs, living above ground in the sunlight, with everything being good. But we brought them with us. But because they don't operate the same way we do, they don't know. They just kind of exist as if they did the first time. But we know. And that's also why, I think that explains why the soul has the souls of the lost children. It's because we just kind of never got rid of them from Undertale. Like, we still have their powers, like, they would obviously be moved on or something else, but we still have their powers because we just never got rid of them. Fuck, I think I lost my train of thought. God damn it. Fuck, what was my train of thought? Oh yeah, with us being brought over to the new world and us essentially getting tricked and forced to be Chris as our new identity in the world instead of what we wanted to build ourselves to be. I think that the reason the entity would do that is because they have some sort of vendetta against Azrael. They have some kind of hatred for him. So they are trying to use us, someone that Azrael cares about more than probably anyone else in the world because of what we mean to him, what we did to save him, to essentially punish Azrael, to make him pay for something that the entity blames him for or hates him for. Oh, right, this level. Fuck, I shouldn't have died on this level. No! I have to restart the full-ass game now. Like, whatever the entity is trying to punish Azrael, trying to get back at Azrael, trying to kill Azrael by using Chris. I think the method of doing it is causing Chris to achieve the hyper-death state. The reason why is I was looking at the people who were getting kidnapped by the Knight. Or the people, and in addition to the people who like have been kidnapped or been targeting for getting kidnapped, I was looking at who was a potential target, who was in the areas for getting kidnapped. And I noticed something kind of blatant, is that the people who are being kidnapped or that were in the areas where they could have been kidnapped are the boss monsters from Undertale. So the confirmed kidnappings we have are Undine and Asgore. The confirmed attempted kidnapping we have is Toriel. However, something I noticed is that in both the places where Toriel could have been kidnapped, Alphys was also there. Alphys was also one of the boss monster souls that needed to be like taken in order to achieve the hyperdeath state. I missed shit. But as fucking Alphys was one of the ones that could have been taken. And then something else I noticed is that in chapter 1, Sans tells us, like, hey, you should go hang out with Papyrus. You should go talk to Papyrus. You should just go see him. And then we never get to see Papyrus. Papyrus just never shows up. But if you examine Sans and Papyrus's house, in chapter 1, you can hear Bone Trussell playing from inside. You can hear sounds, you can hear movement. And then every time you get the opportunity to examine the door after chapter 2, it's quiet. There's no movement, there's no sound, there's no nothing. And the reason I think for that is I've seen some people equate that to Papyrus being the knight. I think that is not the case. I think what is happening is that Papyrus was kidnapped by the knight. Because something else I noticed about the knight is that the knight only appears to show up at night. Like, the knight was not present for a vast majority of Chapter 5, which happens at sundown, and then when you get back out of the Dark World, it's nighttime. Chapter 3 takes place entirely at night, and then the knight shows up at the end to capture Toriel. Chapter 4 also takes place at night, and the knight is in the church. So then, but something in Chapter 4 that's noticeable is that there is this big door at the back of the room that if you try and examine it, Chris doesn't open it. With the obvious implication being that that's because that's where the knight's hiding, because it says like it looks like a full-grown person could sit back here. At the end of Chapter 2, there is another one of those doors. There's another one of those doors that says like it looks like it can hide a full-grown person, but the door is open, it's empty. So I think what happened is since Chris snuck off to make Cyberworld in the middle of the night, no one was there except for Papyrus. Papyrus got kidnapped, we weren't there to stop it, it just happened. And then later on we came back with Susie, Noelle, Birdley, and all that, and just went through it normally. So that with me thinking Papyrus could get taken, and me noticing that Alphys was in a lot of the locations to also get taken, it's making me feel like that whoever is behind the Dark World plot is trying to cause a hyperdeath to happen. And Chris seems like the most likely target because of being related to Azrael. I kind of have... I should clarify, a lot of these theories, I feel like they're kind of correct, but could probably easily be disproven by something I missed. There is one that I am 99% sure is correct, and I want to save it for last because of how important and big it is. But it's kind of relevant to this, so I kind of have to just skip over it and not explain the proper why I think this way. But I think that Alphys was also being targeted both in the school and in the church because, well, for one, obviously Alphys was in the church. But another thing is when you look at where the first Dark World was, the one in Chapter 1, it was in the school supply closet, a place that normally only teachers would go. Meaning that... I need to stop being stupid. Meaning that it's in a spot where... What is that fucking picture? Where normally only a teacher would go. God fucking damn it. I'm stupid. Normally only a teacher would go. Someplace you would only expect a teacher to go. And the two teachers are Toriel and Alphys. They are both people who were necessary to the hyperdeath plot. So I think that the reason Alphys didn't get kidnapped at the start of Chapter 1 was more or less that she got lucky. You know, because she just wanted to get Susie out of the classroom. She sent Susie instead. And that allowed her to escape getting kidnapped. Because if Alphys got sent into the Dark World, Alphys would not have been able to leave. Alphys would not figure that shit out. Meaning that she would have been stuck there until nighttime when the knight could have came to pick her up. And if it wasn't Alphys that went in there, the only other option for a teacher, the only other likely option would be a teacher. Someone that could go in there. The only other option would be Toriel, which is also one of the boss monsters that were involved in hyperdeath. And with that being like that, as I swim down to this and focusing on the game instead of what I'm trying to say and losing my train of thought multiple times. With that being like that, it seems as if that everyone that's getting targeted, everyone that has potential to be targeted, is involved in a hyperdeath plot. And with me thinking that the antagonist is trying to punish Azrael, it would make sense that they intend to do that. They intend to essentially force Chris to hyperdeath. I don't touch that chest. They intend to force Chris to hyperdeath as kind of like a fuck you to Azrael, because of, since at that time, or well, not at that time, in general, Chris and the player are the same entity, meaning that they would, you know, Chris would be aware of what happened in Undertale, would be aware of the hyperdeath plot, would be aware of saving Azrael and all that, and go through all that. So if someone were trying to punish Azrael, the biggest, most obvious punishment I could see would be to be causing the person who went through so much to save you from one of the worst things that ever happened to you, and doing the exact same thing to them. So I think that, like, that is why I think that hyperdeath is still going to be the end of the road for the main goal for whoever the villain is. Which makes me realize I did not explain something I thought I did, and I should, is that I think there are 4 entities in Deltarune that have canonically experienced the events in Undertale. The first 2 I've already really explained, Azrael and the player, obviously having the power of saving and all that, and being the ones who remade the world. They make the most sense for that. The next one, I think, is Sans, because Sans was aware of the different timeline shifts and stuff like that. So, So I think that Sans is also aware of what's going on. In addition to him being aware of the timeline shifts, I think that Sans is also pretty much taking up the exact same role that he did in Undertale, where he's more or less just watching us and really only stepping in if we do something really, really bad. Like, for example, Snowgrave. Because in Snowgrave, Sans gives us a key item, which is a loaf of bread. And the loaf of bread, when you examine it and try and use it, it specifically states that it leaves a trail of crumbs. I think that Sans gave us that to try and... I need to not drown to death. Especially not as Chris while I'm talking about Snowgrave. Sans gave us that as a way to lead Susie to where we are. I think that Sans intends for Susie to be the one to stop us from finishing off Snowgrave. I do have my own theories about what Snowgrave is and what's going on with that, but I'll get back to them. The fourth person, another reason I think Sans is aware and trying to help us is that what happened with Toriel in Chapter 4. Because in the Knight is going, I'm gonna die. The Knight is trying to capture people, trying to kidnap people, and that seems to be the only reason they're showing up. Who were they kidnapping in Chapter 4? You know, like, Toriel wasn't there, Alphys wasn't there. But Toriel was there. Toriel was there for a little bit, and then left, went to Sans' shop, and then, god fucking damn this eel, man. Went to Sans' shop, and then, Toriel states that, in Chapter 5, she states that she saw Chris and Susie walking towards the church, and was about to go follow them. If she had followed them, she would have gotten stuck in the Dark World again, and could have been captured by the Knight. But Sans led her away. He led her back home. So I think that while Sans is still operating off of the I'm lazy, and even though I can absolutely fix all this, I don't want to, Sans is essentially trying to give us the benefit of the doubt and try and help us out. He took Toriel away from the church to make sure she didn't get kidnapped. I think another good explanation of why Toriel should have been kidnapped or wasn't, or like was intended to be kidnapped but got lucky, was at the end of Chapter 2, we get to see the computer room. And it's nice and neat. It's not, like, it looks pretty much exactly how you would expect it to look. The church, on the other hand, is fucking decimated. It's torn apart as if someone was looking for something that should have been there but wasn't. So I think Toriel was supposed to be there and was expected to be there, but because, like, Sans is trying to help Chris, and is giving like Chris and the player the benefit of the doubt and trying to be like, hey, I'm trying to help us out. He kind of cheated, and he took Toriel away from the church to make sure she couldn't get kidnapped, but also while doing it in a way that wouldn't raise suspicion of Sans. I know I can get this, I've done it before. That wouldn't raise suspicion of him as like being aware of what's going on. I think that's also why he tells us to go hang out with Papyrus, because he knows Papyrus is going to get kidnapped in Chapter 2, and he's essentially trying to guilt trip us. So yeah, I think Sans taking Toriel at the end of... Fucking, I'll come back with Tab. Sans taking Toriel at the end of Chapter 4 was him trying to save Toriel, was him trying to put Toriel in a spot to where she couldn't get kidnapped, to try and like help out Chris, to throw Chris a bone, to try and encourage Chris to do the right thing and be like, hey, I helped your mom, don't fucking kill everyone. Because what Chris has shown is that Chris does still care about his family. He still loves Toriel, he still loves Asgore, despite the fact that he's doing all these things that are extremely detrimental to them. Going as far as to most likely being the reason that Toriel and Asgore got divorced. So I think that because of that, I think more than ever that Chris is not evil, and that he is essentially going along with the Dark World plot for a specific reason that we do not know yet. Or as like trying to stop the bad guy from doing what they're doing from the inside. Which leads me to who I think the fourth person is. And this one is kind of weird, because I don't really have a good answer for this. The first and most obvious one, according to the community, is Gaster. And the reason I specified to the community is that, as I stated, I'm going based on my personal examples with the games and all that, and my examples with Gaster has been, I am aware of Gaster, and I know that Gaster was like a former scientist of Asgore that somehow got blasted out of space and time, and that Gaster talks in wingdings. That's about it, though. That's all I know about Gaster. So while it makes sense to me that Gaster would be the antagonist, I don't know enough about that character to make a concise judgment call. So I don't want to make that judgment call, even if it makes sense, simply because I don't have that confirmed information. As Rocky coughs up his lungs. I waited until you were asleep to start this recording specifically to make sure you weren't coughing up and being all gross. You little bastard. But yeah, like I said, I don't really know more or less anything about Gaster. So it doesn't feel right to make that judgment call definitively. But the only other thing I could think of is kind of a long shot, and is kind of the equivalent of snorting cocaine, like an entire bag of it, to reach this mental conclusion. And that is Flowey. I think that, and not like oh, it's Azrael. I mean like Flowey, like as in Azrael and Flowey are separate entities in Deltarune instead of being the same person. I don't really have a good explanation as to why, based on like definitive information we know from the games. It's more of just a gut feeling based on something I saw that was a little suspicious. So what that suspicious thing was, is as I was playing through the game again, looking at all the information after Chapter 5, I got to the part where you fight Eram. And I was like, now knowing that the shadow crystals, or the shadow shards, or whatever the fuck, are shards of broken dreams, I was looking for more information on that to see if I could find a hint at what's going on with those. And then, with Eram being like super highly connected to that, being like pretty much the only person directly telling us to go get those, I thought that ERAM might be involved. I thought that there was more to ERAM than we saw, which obviously there is, because what the fuck is going on with that thing? But I was trying to figure out what that was specifically, and for the reason that I still don't want to talk about because it's the main theory that I think is correct no matter what, I reversed ERAM's name. I like mirrored it, and what I got, what ERAM backwards is mare. And I saw that, I'm like, okay, so that's probably nothing then, right? Because ERAM is very clearly not a horse. But then I thought of it in terms of a dream, being connected to dreams, and the fact that ERAM's name was capitalized. ERAM is a mare connected to shadows and dreams with a distinct smile and laugh. ERAM is a nightmare. And not like in a, oh, the entire story is just a dream kind of way. In a, Chris and Azrael having the power over dreams means that one of them having a nightmare is probably really fucking bad. So I think what ERAM is more specifically is essentially the worry of Flowey. It is Chris and the players' fear of, like, what would have happened if they didn't step in? Like, what would have happened if Azrael never got saved? And that would also explain why the main antagonist of Deltarune is, one, trying to punish Azrael, and two, trying to cause a hyper death. Because that was Azrael's goal that Flowey didn't get to achieve because of us having that influence. And for why Flowey would want to kill Azrael, I feel like you don't really need an answer for why an evil version of you would want to kill you. I feel like that's pretty standard and understandable. I feel like you could just be like, oh yeah, there's an evil version of me, of course it wants me dead. Like, because it seems pretty reasonable to just think that. So I think that if ERAM is like a leftover fragment of Flowey, or the worry of Flowey coming back brought from dreamers who have powers over dreams, that it would explain why, like, a lot of the stuff is happening. It could explain, like, a lot of the negative stuff that's going on. It could explain why hyperdeath is going to be the end goal again. It could explain why all of this is happening at a time when Azrael isn't around, but is, like, coming back in 5 seconds. Because what the end goal is to have Azrael come home to finding Chris hyperdeath. In a state, basically having Azrael seeing Chris in the worst possible state ever. Being in the state that Chris spent so much time, or Chris and the player, like us, spent so much time to try and stop, to try and fix, because of how bad it was. Because of the consequences of it, because of the fact that our brother was being ripped apart from the inside by grief. So the same thing happening to us would be like the ultimate punishment for Azrael. As for why I think Gaster could be an option, like I said, all I know about Gaster is that Gaster got, like, ripped apart from space and time, being like one of Asgore's scientists. I think it was because of what happened to Azrael that Gaster was put in that situation, but like I said, I don't know enough to, like, be definitive about that, so that's why I'm kind of iffy about that one. I think either of them are completely plausible. I think either Nightmare of Flowey or Gaster are both completely reasonable answers. So then on that note, probably forgetting more stuff because I always forget shit that I want to talk about. Which, that's another thing. If I say something that makes a little bit of sense but it feels like I'm missing a piece of information, there's a good chance I have it. So, like, if something I'm saying sounds plausible, but I don't say it correctly, I encourage you to go prove me either right or wrong on your own. Like, because I do just want to share this just for more or less for fun, in addition to wanting to try and explain what my reasoning are and what my thought process is for the game, because I really like the game. But then on that note, I think I should explain a theory I saw that I am surprised I have only seen the mention of the theory and not any additional details on the theory. And that is the original timeline theory. Basically, after fuck, I'm going backwards. Nope. Basically after, I saw someone say that when you start up a new game, like for the first time ever, and you overwrite that first save file, it's already saved to Chris. So that made people think that there was an original timeline. There was a timeline that already played through the game. And then I just strangely saw them not see anything else about, say anything else about that. Which, it felt weird that you would just bring up something like that and then, oh, I can't jump. And I'm dead. I'm gonna have to go. Shit. I thought it was weird to bring that up and then not say anything else about that. Or like what could have possibly happened in that original timeline. They just brought it up as a possibility of existing rather than it having any information on it. So I started thinking like what could have possibly happened in that timeline. And what I think happened is the reason Chris is going along with the Dark World plot. I think in the original timeline, Chris wasn't going along with the Dark World plot. And I missed the fucking star. Alright. Chris wasn't going along with the Dark World plot. Chris was more or less just kind of going along for the ride, kind of the same way Susie was and Noelle was and all that stuff, where they were part of the legend, they were trying to fix everything. But I think something really, really bad happened. Specifically in Chapter 6. Because Gerson says that Chapter 6 was written, but then after that, it just stopped being written for some reason. And I think what that is referring to is the fact that Chris reset the timeline after Chapter 6. Now, as for why we don't remember it, as for why we don't really know any of the stuff that's going on in the game, but Chris does, is because in the original timeline, like in the original playthrough, in the original timeline, we weren't separated. Chris and the soul were not separated. We were still one being. But then in the second timeline, in order to change things, Chris did get separated to try and fix everything. And I have... The reason how I think Chris got separated is another thing where it's like, oh man, I can't wait to explain this. Too bad, Are you kidding me? I had that and I missed it. Yeah, it's another thing where I have to explain this whole other thing first. But basically, I think that Chris was not involved in the Dark World plot in the original timeline. I think what happened in the original timeline is more or less Chris got what he wanted. I think that in the original timeline, Chris managed to make... Well, not managed to make Susie fall in love with it. Susie fell in love with Chris in the original timeline. I think what happened is, in the original timeline, Chris didn't really have any romantic interest in Susie at first. I think what it was like a proper love triangle where, Noelle was in love with Susie, obviously. Chris was in love with Noelle. And Susie was in love with Chris. And Susie ended up winning. Susie ended up being the one who ended up winning the triangle. I think that there is a lot of evidence that of like Chris, or Susie being in love with Chris, obviously just for a lot of stuff, but from like a perspective of she doesn't know because of manipulation and that's happening in the timeline. Because I think that the entire reason the timeline got reset. You okay, Rocky? The entire reason the timeline got reset was because something happened in Chapter 6 that Chris thinks would not have happened or would not have been as bad if Susie wasn't in love with him. And I think what that is Chris getting the soul removed in the Dark World. I think that in Chapter 6, we are going to be separated from Chris, and that is when the hyperdeath plot is going to start to be achieved. And the only way to stop it is going to be to kill Chris. It's going to be for Susie to take the soul and kill Chris. And because of that, Susie wasn't able to do it because she was in love with Chris. So Chris saw that, and wanting to like make sure everyone gets saved, the world gets saved, Chris decided to make a sacrificial play and reset the timeline, met up with the person who was making the plot and said, I'll help you. I will help you do this if I get to to try and manipulate how the story goes to make sure that Susie doesn't end up being absolutely decimated by most likely having to kill Chris. So Chris's plan was more or less to make sure that Susie and Noelle end up together. I think there's a lot of evidence that pretty much directly pretty much directly states that oh shit, and I'm dead again. That directly states that Susie and Noelle's relationship is being forced, and I think that, and I did it again. I think that it's Chris. I think it's Chris forcing it. At first, like when I was doing my playthrough, I'm like, oh man, Chris is gonna fucking hate me for trying to put Susie and Noelle together because I'm laughing at fanfiction over here. But then I saw a line of dialogue in the scene that I missed again, where if you go talk to Susie after the yellow and blue fight, Chris more or less admits that he's in love with her. But what's weird about that scene is that I think that it's pretty safe to say in games where you have multiple dialogue, but like sometimes you can end the dialogue early, whichever dialogue option is the one that advances, god damn it, I did it again. Whatever is the one that advances the text the furthest, whichever gets the longest dialogue box is the correct one. It's not like necessarily the right one, but the one that is wanting to be said. And relative to that, for this, the one that ends up with the longest box when you talk to Susie like that is the one where you say, first of all, that you think, rather than asking Susie, like you get a point where you can ask, where Susie's like, oh man, I kind of feel bad that you were just kind of sitting all alone while I was like carrying Noelle and stuff. And the two options are Chris asking Susie to carry him next, or saying that Noelle and Susie will work out as a couple. And if you choose that one, if you choose the one where you're like, hey, can you carry me next? Susie just kind of changes the subject, and you move on to the next part where Susie's like, oh, by the way, I'm not even aware of what kind of person you're attracted to, and just absolutely decimating my boy. But if you choose the option where you say, I think you and Noelle will work out, the conversation continues, and then you get an option for, I can't remember what the second one was, but I know that one of the options, and he's going off the side, isn't he? One of the options was Chris telling Susie that he thinks she's cute, but then he says it like so quietly she can't hear. And it feels weird. It felt really weird that it's like, okay, why is the correct dialogue box first saying, you'll work out with someone else, but I like you a lot? And that made me think that Chris is the one sabotaging his chances with Susie. That Chris is intentionally ruining his chances with Susie because he thinks that what happened at the end of chapter 6 would not happen if Susie was not in love with him. And that's why you get moments in like the Ferris wheel when Susie goes like, oh man, I wish Chris was here. Because in the original timeline, Chris was there. But Chris intentionally avoided being with Susie in those spots to try and force Noelle and Susie together. And there is tons of evidence of Noelle and Susie's relationship being forced. In chapter 5 alone, in the festival scene alone. So first of all, when you play the hammer game, Noelle says, well, not Noelle says, Susie hits it early and it only goes up halfway, but then she forces it up the rest of the way. And then after that, on the Ferris wheel, I should not have did that way. Why did I do that way? Fucking Susie and Noelle. Susie mentions that the Ferris wheel, the wheel only went up halfway. That it stopped after going halfway up and then just came back down. And that she was a little bit bummed out at that. And then when you do the votes, if you pick Susie and Noelle, she's essentially like, she's phrasing it as if she's kind of not really bribing you, but rewarding you for doing what she wants rather than doing what you want. It seems like a lot of what's going on with Susie and Noelle seems like it's being forced. And if it's being forced by Chris, then it would make sense that the reason why Chris is trying to ruin his chances with Susie, despite very clearly being in love with Susie, is because he blames something that happened on him getting Susie to love him. And I know that sounds a little bit backwards from what I said at the beginning, where Susie was the one that fell in love with Chris. And Chris was in love with Noelle. But I think what happened is that Susie essentially... I think that in the scenes where, like, Susie's like, oh man, I wish Chris was here, and Chris was there, like, specifically the Ferris wheel. I think what happened in the case of the Ferris wheel, because of Chris wanting to ride with Noelle, but Noelle not wanting to ride with Chris, what happened in that case is, like, Chris, when it got to the point where all three of them were to get on the Ferris wheel, Noelle refused to get on with Chris. And seeing that, Susie kind of, like, felt bad for Chris because Chris was her friend. So she offered to ride with Chris, and then had the same fucking fanfiction scene, but with Chris instead of Noelle, and that's when Susie fell in love with Chris. And then at that point, it was just a matter of, I guess, who won. And Susie ended up being the winner. So because of that, is why you get a lot of weird conflicting feelings with Chris, to where Chris seems to have feelings for Noelle, but also very clearly has feelings for Susie. It's because both is true. It's because originally Chris did have feelings for Noelle, but because of Susie's actions, he fell in love with Susie. And, and that kind of manipulated his actions during the rest of the thing. Like, that's why he's trying to push him and Susie apart. It's because of the blame of this wouldn't happen if Susie didn't fall in love with me. So he's trying to ruin it. I should also probably mention... It's kind of weird. So originally, I thought that for the original timeline, the reason that things were so different was that Ralsei didn't exist. I have reasons for that I still think are a little bit correct, but after I went back and played Chapter 4, Ralsei directly gets mentioned, like, it says, like, the Prince from the Dark in the prophecy. So that one, it pretty much to me that says, like, oh yeah, no, Ralsei absolutely was supposed to exist the whole time. It wasn't like he wasn't there the first time and then got added in. The reason I thought he didn't exist, but does exist in the second timeline, was because Ralsei seems to be the physical embodiment of hope. Are you serious right now? Ralsei seems to be as if he is supposed to be hope incarnate. Specifically for Chris, because a lot of, like, what happens when you choose to do the stuff with Susie in the festival, like, if you choose to ride the Ferris wheel with Susie specifically says, like, oh yeah, Ralsei told me that I should really ride the Ferris wheel with you. Don't know why, but just said it. Or when you do that stupid fucking scene on the train, Ralsei tries to hint at Chris wanting Susie to be the first person. I still can't. Make the dumb train pun about romance. And Susie just kind of brushes it off. But the point is that Ralsei tried to push Susie, seemingly is trying to push Susie and Chris together. And I think the reason why is because Ralsei is aware that Chris is trying to sacrifice himself to... Well, not really. Chris thinks that the story ends with him being sacrificed, and he's trying to ruin his chances with Susie in order to try and make the sacrifice less devastating. Make it be something she can actually accomplish without dying on the inside. But Ralsei is still trying to have Chris get those feelings. Still trying to have Chris work towards falling in love with Susie, because Ralsei is trying to give Chris hope that there is still a chance to not end with him being sacrificed in order to, like, to beat the prophecy, essentially, to find a way to go against what is supposed to happen and end up both of them just being happy. So he doesn't want Chris to give up on Susie for that reason. He doesn't want Chris to give up so that way Chris can still have hope. I feel like I'm forgetting something big. I feel like I am. There was something else a part of that was important, and I'm just completely blanking on it. Oh boy, that's not great. What was it? Fuck, it was important. Oh, right. I think that while Chris is still preparing to sacrifice himself, still preparing to take that kind of nuclear option of the story ends with me dying, so I'm just gonna do it in a way that puts the least amount of pain on people. Is that he is still actively, Chris is also, in addition to Ralsei, actively trying to find a way to beat the prophecy. That's why Chris is pursuing the shadow crystals, specifically to do that. But Chris is afraid. And there has been moments, like, Chris has shown moments of being, like, terrified. Like, specifically of, like, what happens during the Spampton thing. So I think Chris is afraid of failing. He's afraid that if he fails, if he still tries to pursue Susie, and that if he fails, it's going to just devastate her again. So he wants to have that fallback to where, if I succeed, great. But if I fail, at least Susie can still be happy. Um, and the reason I think Chris is so afraid is because Chris knows what's going on. Like, he knows what's coming for him. He knows what is waiting to kill him. He knows that hyperdeath is going to happen. He knows who specifically is out to get him and all of that. I think that Chris is just terrified. He is afraid that he will fail, so he's trying to have a backup to make sure that everything, if he does fail, that everything happens in a way that is still enjoyable for the people who survive. Not realizing that that's not working at all, and that Susie is still very clearly falling in love with him despite the fact that she doesn't realize that she does. Another thing, kind of to segue to Noelle, is I kind of got surprised by a line of dialogue that Noelle said. So, basically, during the scene where where Chris is beating you with a hockey stick, Noelle and Susie have a conversation, and they're talking about, like, Chris. Look, they're talking about Chris. They're talking about, like, oh, it's so weird that Chris is, like, really good at flirting, and Noelle, like, starts freaking out. But one thing is that, at certain moments, Chris, like, stops looking because he's either interested in what they're saying or embarrassed by what they're saying and starts blushing. And one of those moments is when Noelle is talking about riding the Ferris wheel with Chris. And she's just like, oh, well, I don't think a relationship counts if it's forced. And that being the case, like, how am I trying to say this? That being the case, it seems as if Noelle is like... It seems as if Noelle is saying, like, oh, Chris was just trying to... Me and Chris were essentially forced to spend time together, so it's not possible for me or Chris to have feelings for each other. And it seems like she's just brushing off Chris's feelings as not possible due to not being desired. And at first, that's just like, okay, that makes sense. Like, if two people are forced to hang out together, it would make sense why you think it wouldn't be possible for them to like each other. But then in chapter 5, she says something kind of weird. So, there was... Look, if you try and ride the Ferris wheel with Noelle in chapter 5, she goes like, haha, yeah, I'm not falling for that one, Chris. But then I saw some people say that it is possible to ride the Ferris wheel with Noelle. So I was trying to figure out how to do that. I was trying to figure out, like, how could that happen? And then I found out that if you go to the King and Queen vote and you vote for Chris and Noelle, in addition to Noelle changing her vote from Noelle and Susie to Noelle and Chris, stating that Chris wrote it specifically in a way that Chris wrote it when they were kids, and then she also changes it to... Don't get in the sand! I'm not getting those coins back. She also changed it to be the same vote with their names spelt the wrong way, stating that, like, it's from their childhood, it's from when they were little kids, it's from like that. And if you do that, then Noelle will let you ride the Ferris wheel with her. And she doesn't really even... She kind of, like, contemplates it for a minute, but it's not like a, should I do this to be good to Chris or anything. She just kind of... It looks like she's fondly remembering their childhood and is like, yeah, let's go on the ride again. Piece of shit. I need that. Bastard. Give me my hat back. And it's like she's fondly remembering going on, and then when you get on there, she mentions that she remembers that the reason Chris shook the Ferris wheel and like that was because they lost the king and queen vote when they were little kids, and she was like really upset. And then she says that she just realized that Chris doing that was Chris's way of trying to cheer her up. And then at that point, your options are to either shake the wheel again, and if you do, Noelle essentially just says like, "Oh, Chris, you haven't grown up at all." But then she says, "I haven't grown up either," and starts laughing as if as if she's trying to say like, "I finally understand you." But if you choose to not say anything is where the dialogue that surprised me happened. Noelle says like, "Yeah, no," she starts brushing it off again like, "Oh, Chris is just teasing me again," or whatever, just like always. But then she says that Chris is just hanging out with me because Chris is being forced to again, just like when we were kids, because I've always been forcing Chris to hang out with me. She was saying she was the reason Chris was hanging out, that the two of them were hanging out, that she was forcing Chris to spend time with her. I had the assumption it was the other way around, that Noelle was trying to say like, "Oh, Chris's feelings don't matter because Chris was just forcing me to go along." And then she trails off by saying kind of like, "Now how you're just," and just doesn't finish the statement, as if she understands that Chris being at the festival with Noelle and Susie is something Chris doesn't want to do. It's something that's being forced on him. And that kind of makes me think that the way to get Chris to end up with Susie isn't going to be to work Susie over. It's going to be to work Noelle over. It's going to make Noelle realize that Susie is better for someone else, and that Chris is essentially just Chris wants to be with Susie, and Chris gets along better with Susie, and that Noelle is essentially forcing Chris to kind of just forcing Chris to ruin his chances with Susie for her sake. And I think that if we get her to realize that, then she'll step away without any hurt feelings. And that does kind of, I feel like at that point I should segue into Snowgrave. What I think Snowgrave is. And this one kind of is a lot, and is required to... My thought process for this is required to have the thought process of Chris and the Soul are the same entity, but severed instead of separate entities. And that because we were severed through unnatural means is the reason that we behave the way that we do, and we don't have like the memories or anything like that. During Snowgrave, it feels weird because of how Chris reacts. Like, it seems like Chris despises what we're doing and wants to stop us no matter what. But then at the same time, Chris doesn't really fight back at all in Chapter 5 in Snowgrave after we drag him out of bed. He just kind of sits there and lets us ruin Noelle. And I think that's because Snowgrave is not anything malicious due to what we're doing to Noelle. I think Snowgrave is being born from Chris's desire to be understood by Noelle again. Because Noelle says that she doesn't remember understanding Chris, but then every time they talk about when they were kids, she acts as if they did understand each other. And then, if you look at... I know this is kind of a weird segue, but if you look at the teas, the friendship teas, like that are supposed to show off how much each of the characters like each other based on how much they heal you. Chris and Noelle's is weird. It is 70. It is the second lowest one possible, despite the fact that every time they interact with each other, it seems they get along pretty well. And for a while, I was like, what's going on with that? Why is it 70 both ways? Like, I was trying to figure out, like, why that could be that way. And then I started looking at some of the other stuff that was going on with Chris and Noelle. When you give Noelle the chocolate donut, she mentions that, she just passively mentions, like, oh, Chris, you want some? And gives him half. She cuts the donut in half and gives it to him. And there's a lot of other stuff like that, too, where it seems like they have a misunderstanding, but then they don't. Like with the hammer minigame, if you choose Chris and Noelle to do it, no, you actually have to play the minigame. You actually have to time it out. However, no matter how you time it out, Chris and Noelle max it out. Like if you go to... Oh, I could have gotten out of that. Quicksand! They max out no matter what, implying that they actually get along really, really well. Like near perfectly. So I thought it was really weird that the Chris T and the Noelle T only heals 50 or only heals 70. When like Chris heals like 120 or some shit from Susie T, when obviously he like is very in love with Susie, and heals 60 from Ralsei T. I think I have a reason for thinking that too, but it's not relative to this, so I'm gonna skip it for now to stay on topic. So I'm like, why does the T only give 70? And then I realized it's because it doesn't. It's not that it gives 70, it's that they give 140. But because there is a like false misunderstanding between Chris and Noelle, they only think it gives 70, so that's how much it heals. And that false misunderstanding is Noelle knew us when we were one entity. And then afterwards, when we got split into two, she doesn't think she can understand us anymore because we're acting weird. We're still acting... We are still the same person. We are still Chris. We are still the person she grew up with and knew. But she doesn't get that anymore because it's just... I messed up. Because it's disjointed. It's not flat out. It's not, like, right in your face. It is like there is a fog between Chris and Noelle that only they can see, and it's not actually there in reality. And that is because of Chris being separated into the body and soul, and Noelle doesn't understand that. So it seems like they don't get along when they do, because they simply do not understand. Like Noelle doesn't understand Chris as two entities. And Chris doesn't really understand Noelle because of just being disjointed in general. It's also why Chris and Susie get along so well, and why Susie always just says, oh, Chris acting in these ways that Noelle is describing as weird is Chris being normal. Because Susie didn't know us until after we got separated. So us acting like this is the only way she's known us. I know I'm focusing on this game a lot right now. So, like, Noelle's understanding of us is being split apart by the fact that she is one entity that knew us as one entity, but now we are two entities. And that's why she doesn't understand us. And that's where Snowgrave comes from. Not from a malicious thought, not from a dark thought, but from a very deep desire for Noelle to understand us again. Get the fuck out of here, you piece of shit lightning ball. It's just Chris desperately trying to get Noelle to understand us again. But in a way that Chris does not want Noelle to go through. And that way is the Thorn Ring. Alright, where the fuck is this last secret? What am I missing? What? It's probably because I died. Whatever. I'm not going for all stars anyway. That's what Snowgrave is. It is trying to force Noelle to understand us. And at first, what I thought Snowgrave was, based on the fact that after you Thorn Ring Noelle, she gets a little floating red dot in her, and she's able to talk with like telepathy and all that stuff. I thought that what it was forcing a piece of our soul into her. And but then I thought something about that felt wrong at all times, because it's like with how careful Toby Fox is about all this stuff, it feels as if that was supposed to be what's going on, he would have removed a pixel from the heart after that happened. So the fact that he didn't just made it feel like something else was going on. But I couldn't put my finger on what it was. That is until chapter 5. Noelle starts acting in a way where Susie describes it as weird. She describes it as, I don't really understand what's going on anymore, but Noelle is still doing stuff that Noelle wants to do. Kind of like the way Noelle doesn't understand Chris, because Chris is acting weird despite acting the same way that Chris wants to act. And with Noelle talking in through thoughts, I had actually made an assumption that Noelle was going to realize it wasn't Chris making her stronger, but the player making her stronger, and then she was going to steal the soul from the player and essentially kill Chris after realizing it was Chris, or the player, not Chris, making her better. Well, better in her eyes. But then when you get to chapter 5 at the lake, she refers to Chris as Chris, despite the fact that she knows about us. We directly told her we're here. We directly told her we're the ones doing this. So the fact that she is seemingly aware, that she is aware of our presence and still just refers to Chris as Chris, tells me that Noelle sees Chris, is one of the pieces of evidence that I might be right about Chris and the soul being disconnected instead of separate entities, is that she understands what's going on with us now, because we did the same thing to her. We separated her soul and her body. And what the Thorn Ring is something that can separate body and soul. It is something that allows whoever wears it to have that disconnected feeling, or disconnected state. But in order to achieve it, they need to do... it is like a dark ritual that requires not very good actions to be taken. So then that brings me to where I think... So I think what we're doing to Noelle is more or less, as much as it pisses me off to say this, what Birdley said in chapter 4. When Birdley was on the phone, I thought it was funny that he went like, "Oh no, I turned Susie into a yandere." I thought that was funny because in Snowgrave, that's essentially what happened to Noelle with her opinion of Chris. She's essentially a murder psychopath for Chris now. And because of that, and because of the way Noelle reacted to other stuff, it also made me realize what we're doing to Noelle is we are turning Noelle into player 2. We are giving her her own player soul. That is why she can speak through telepathy. That is why she can understand us. That is why she is able... That's why she's acting the way that she's acting. Now, that might seem a little bit weird at first, because Noelle is acting like a fucking psychopath. But the thing is, Noelle has kind of always been a psychopath. For one thing, her T, or Susie T, heals Noelle 400. That much, at first glance, appears to just be like, oh, okay, Noelle's in love with Susie. That makes sense, that would be that high. But then if Chris is also in love with Susie, why would Chris's not also be that high for Susie? Why is Chris's only like 120? And it's because Noelle is not in love with Susie. Noelle is infatuated with Susie. The like obsessive, gross part of like desiring someone. She's not like, and there's a lot of evidence that that's what's going on too with Noelle. Like when you look at her fucking bathroom, not bathroom, the fridge in her living room for some reason, she states it's full of water bottles, and they're talking about like, yeah, you can just get free water. If you examine it again, Susie says like, oh, by the way, why do you have so many water bottles? I'm pretty sure I've seen you use the tap water at school after I used it. And Noelle gets embarrassed and just kind of brushes it off because what that little freak was actually doing was trying to taste Susie's spit off the fucking water fountain. And Noelle also shows a lot of violent tendencies too. Like, she starts choking Birdley. She says she fantasizes about choking Birdley. She's doing a bunch of all this really weird, really suspicious stuff. So with her also saying like, hey, I've been the one forcing Chris to spend time with me, not the other way around. It seems as if there is a psychopath lurking in Noelle that is essentially being kept in check by the fact that Noelle's kind of a pushover. Kind of the fact that she is afraid that she is kind of a softer person, that she can't really make decisions for herself all too much. And then when you're giving her that option to make decisions for herself, when you're giving her that control that the player has, it is unleashing the psychopath within her. Simply because she no longer has those inhibitions that is preventing it from coming out in the first place. It's not that it wasn't there before, it's that it was kind of being bottled up before by who Noelle was. And because that changed now, Noelle's full psychopathic tendencies are coming out. Because when Noelle talks to you on the beach, she pretty much has the exact same conversation she does with you as she does with Susie, but it's got a much darker tone to it. It's got a much more like sinister, insane tone to it, where it feels wrong. Something about it feels off. But she's saying more or less the same thing. She's saying like, I hate this town. I want to leave. Like, I always felt trapped. I just want to fly away. She's always had these feelings that lead to the psychopath that is thorned Noelle. But, I forgot. But, she essentially is being prevented by her own inhibitions, her own fears, her own worries, her own personality, and that's not really a bad thing. That's not really saying, like, Noelle is, like, psychotic. That's just saying, like, Noelle has the potential to do so. And basically, she needs some therapy. And we are just unleashing her bad thoughts without the therapy ever happening in Snowgrave. So then why do I think that relates to Chris? Because of the Twisted Sword. The Twisted Sword requires you to get a purified crystal, which everyone thinks, including myself, is going to be what, I can't remember, is his name Seam or Sham? Can't fucking remember. The weird pronunciation, the little plushy dude. He says he'll take the crystals and do something with them. And that's how people think you're going to get the purified crystal. To make the Twisted Sword when you have the Thord Ring. And everyone thinks that, oh, Twisted Sword is going to be abandoned Snowgrave route only. But the thing with that is, the Twisted Sword to me feels like something that is going to be necessary for true ending. But what also feels necessary for true ending is the eggs. And you cannot get both the eggs and the thorn ring in the same in the same pathway. Because in order to get the thorn ring, you need to block out the path to get the egg. So then that would bring up, how do you get the twisted sword then if you need the eggs, the shards, and not to mention in Snowgrave, when you like still have Noelle following with that thorn ring, you can't get all the shards. There's one that you get blocked out of because you skip it. So it's like, okay, if you need all 5 shards, all 5 eggs, and the thorn ring, how do you get that? How does that work? And the answer to that question, I think, is that Chris has a thorn ring. Chris, and that is why Chris and the Soul are the way that they are, because Chris got thorn ringed. Most likely by Des. The reason I say that is because people have been pointing out that there have been a lot of hints at Chris losing his arm. Like that Chris is going to get his arm cut off at some point, most likely due to Image Friend, which I have not talked about in this point because it is also a big thing. But people are looking at this and going like, Chris is going to get his arm cut off. But in a dialogue between Susie and Noelle at in chapter 4, when you're at Noelle's house, the way they describe both the act of like the severed hand or whatever it is, that horror movie they were talking about, and the act of Dragon Blazers 2, well, not the act of it, but the idea of Dragon Blazers 2 as being a sequel to Dragon Blazers is a story, when Dragon Blazers was supposed to be like a retelling of the story of Deltarune, and if the one they're talking about is actually the sequel, then that would also be another reason why I think that Undertale and Deltarune are connected, because, you know, obviously that's the sequel to Undertale is Deltarune. But the way they describe the hand, I think what they say is like, the protagonist hears some music coming from the basement, and then they wake up and find that their hand has been severed and has its own consciousness now. To me, that sounds like they're talking about Chris. That sounds like they're talking about what happened between Chris and the Soul. And the fact that the song that's playing when they're talking about that is, I think it's called Lost Girl or like Find Her or whatever. Des's theme makes it seem like Des is involved with Chris losing, with Chris becoming split. And then there's another piece of information that supports this. In chapter 3, if you go to the capsule machine and you enter in 1,225 points, so 1225 Christmas for Des, it takes you to that weird backroom thing with the mini capsule machine. And in that one, once you find it, you have memories of Des, and then you suddenly feel like your arm is being removed. I think that is hinting at the fact that Des is responsible for the way Chris is right now with the disjointed soul and body. Whether I don't think it is malicious. I don't think it is Des trying to harm Chris. I think it was Des trying to help Chris, and it just backfiring spectacularly and just ending up with her turning into the night and Chris becoming very depressed as no one can understand him anymore. Oh, I guess Chris as in the player, no one can understand anymore, because that's what happened. That we got separated, we got thorned. But I think what's really tragic about Chris's thorn ring, I don't think he can remove it. I think it is somewhere that is impossible for him to remove without removing. I think it is inside of his body. I think it is somewhere where you can't just pull the ring out. Because in the light world, the thorn ring is like an actual thorn. It is just a tiny little plant spike. So that can easily get embedded underneath the skin. I would assume, based on where we put the thorn ring on the well, and the fact that it's a ring in the dark world, that Chris's thorn is probably like embedded deep in the palm of his hand to where you cannot get rid of it without removing Chris's arm. So I think that all the hints of Chris losing his arm have been both hints that Chris might lose his arm in future chapters, and hints at how Chris and the soul ended up being disconnected. And saying, like, if you want to reconnect us, you have to remove the thorn. You have to remove Chris's arm. And that kind of... So I think the way we make the Twisted Sword is not to abandon Snowgrave or anything like that, but to remove Chris's arm. It's to fix the disjointedness. It's to put us back together. But the problem with that is I don't think Chris, when Chris does lose his arm, I don't think it's going to be done the right way. I don't think it's going to be done in the way that allows the soul and body to reform. Okay. Alright, I can just do that apparently. I think it's going to be done in a way that actually does the opposite. I think it's going to be done in a way that permanently separates the soul and the body. Basically what I think is going to happen is I think the thing that is going to be required, that Chris is trying to prevent because he's afraid of how much it's going to devastate Susie, is that Image Friend is going to show up in Chapter 6. And Image Friend is going to rip Chris's soul out and then remove the Thorn Ring and prevent Chris's soul and body from fusing properly. So they are going to be permanently disjointed. And then that is where the hyperdeath plot is going to come in. With the now soulless Chris body that can do whatever the antagonist wants it to do, being perfectly set up for that plot to take place. And more or less, at that point, the only way to save Chris, or to save the world, after that happens, would be to kill Chris's body. I think that the prophecy is directly stating this. With things being shown off that like when one sentence means two things a lot in Deltarune, with the pink fight really just hammering that in. The statement "love finds its way to the girl" with a picture of Susie holding a sword and having a heart in her chest. To me, the double message of that is that at some point, Susie is going to get Chris's soul and is most likely going to have to stab Chris to save the world. And that's going to be how the prophecy ends. And that's essentially where the game ends in a normal playthrough too. Chris stabbing Susie, or Susie stabbing Chris, and Chris dies. And then that's what Chris is trying to make Susie not fall in love with him with, because of being afraid of this is going to happen no matter what, because of how strong Image Friend is. So, like, no matter what I do, Susie is going to be devastated, so I need to lessen the devastation as much as possible. Because there's no way to stop this because of... I'm fucking stupid. Because of how immense this threat is. So, where does the Twisted Sword come in on that? The Twisted Sword is made from the Thorn Ring, using purified crystals. To me, for a reason I have not got into yet, that I keep saying, and I keep talking about and hinting at, and then just backing away from because it's big, is that the Twisted Sword is going to have the opposite effect of the Thorn Ring, where instead of separating the souls, separating the body and soul, it brings them together. So if Susie has the player's soul and stabs Chris with the Twisted Sword, rather than killing Chris, it's going to re-inject the soul into Chris and return us to being one entity, and essentially allow us to defeat the bad guy and save the world. I feel like I'm missing one other point that I wanted to talk about, but I can't remember what it is, so I think at this point it is time for me to finally discuss the theory I think has a 99% chance of being correct. And that is, Deltarune is Undertale, but backwards, but reversed. because a lot of what I noticed that a lot of what Toby Fox has been doing has kind of been like second verse, same as the first, but this time in reverse for stuff in Deltarune. Like the most blatant example I can think of is Gerson and Undine. How Gerson is the hammer of justice and Undine is the spear of justice, where Undine was trying to kill us and like hates us and all that stuff, when Gerson is trying to pretty much do the opposite. He's trying to build us up. He's trying to help us. He's trying to have us beat fate. So it's stuff like that. A lot of stuff like that shows up in Deltarune, where it's like this is the exact same way it happened in Undertale, but it's like backwards. And then I realized the entire game is like that. And I'm actually going to pause here because I had this written down because I was talking to Will about it. And this one, I want to make sure I try and explain this one properly because it is the big one. It is the one I think has a massive chance of being correct. So in Chapter 1 of Undertale, we fall down into the ruins, a hospitable home with a protective queen. In Deltarune Chapter 1, we fall down into an inhospitable castle with a violent king. In Chapter 2 of Undertale, we enter into a quiet town where everything revolves around the holidays. In Chapter 2 of Deltarune, we enter into a loud city where everything revolves around the holiday girl. In Chapter 3 and 4, it can even go for the bosses of Chapter 2, because Papyrus was like super friendly but wants to kill us, and Queen was like super violent but wanted to be our friend, so you could see that too. Chapter 3 and 4, though, is where it feels like at first that theory falls apart. Because Chapter 3 is nothing like Waterfall, and Chapter 4 is nothing like Hotland. Until you remember that Chapter 3 and 4 were released together. Meaning that not only are the events reversed, the order is reversed. And when you do it that way, it fits again. Because in Chapter 3 of Undertale, we went to Waterfall, a solemn place where we learned about the prophecy, and we're being hunted down by the Spear of Justice, who wants to kill us. And in Chapter 4 of Deltarune, we enter into the church and learn about the prophecy that we are trying to... In Undertale, we were trying to fulfill the prophecy. In Deltarune, we're trying to stop the prophecy. And we are aided by the Hammer of Justice, who's going out of his way to help us. And then in Chapter 4 of Undertale, we go on Mettaton's game show. Mettaton being like this super charismatic host that is like super self-centered and caring about themselves and trying to kill us. And in Chapter 3 of Deltarune, we go on Tenna's game show. And Tenna is this super charismatic host that only cares about us and is trying to keep us with him, trying to keep like us constantly being with him. He cares more about us and the people viewing him than he cares about himself. And then going back to Chapter 5, just the normal reverse. In Chapter 5 of Undertale, we enter the Flower King's castle and face off against Asgore, who is very nice, very understanding, but still has to try and kill us, despite the fact that he would rather just welcome us into his family, despite the fact that he would rather care for us than kill us, but he understands that he needs to kill us in order to save his people. And in Chapter 5 of Deltarune, we enter into the Flower King shop. And rather than trying to find Asgore, we try and evade him. He's in Deltarune, he's trying to protect us instead of killing us. And instead of being peaceful, he's on a warpath. And in Undertale, he wants to welcome us into a family. In Deltarune, despite the fact that we are already in his family, we are the cause of all of his problems. So then, with that lining up so fucking perfectly, is why I've been like looking at everything in reverse. It's why I reversed Eram into Mare and all that kind of stuff. So then, let's look at Chapter 6 of Undertale. Chapter 6 of Undertale, you go into the Lost Lab. A decrepit, abandoned place where monsters were experimented on and tortured and had their souls removed. They were specifically kept away from their loved ones in a decrepit place where there was no hope whatsoever. To me, that sounds like the opposite of a hospital. And why that is important is because there are two things in that hospital that are very alarming. The first of all being a nondescript looking chair. The reason that's important is because in Ralsei's explanation of what the Dark World is, a nondescript basic chair turned into Image Friend. Like the full body of it. And something else that was there that I have not heard anyone equate to being important was that in Ralsei's description, underneath Image Friend is running water. And we know that the lake is super important for some reason or another. So I think what is happening with Image Friend is that for Image Friend to show up, there needs to be a nondescript chair and running water. This does kind of get a little bit dicey with Cyberworld, because in order for that theory to work, that part of the theory to work, you have to kind of assume that the computers are water cooled. But the reason I think the water is important is, one, because of how important the lake was, but two, because the sink in Rudy's room, Rudy specifically mentions that Chris has some weird obsession with it. He keeps looking at it as if he expects something to happen with it. So I think what is happening with that is that Chris is aware that Image Friend is there, and that the next place to do the Dark World is going to be that hospital with Rudy. He is afraid that the confrontation is finally coming. Now, how does this work for Chapter 7? And the answer to that question is, it doesn't. Because it's not part of it. And not in a cop-out, I can't think of a reason kind of way, in a, we were expressly told that that's what's happening with it. Because something else is, I may have mentioned this, I can't remember, it's been 2 hours. Toby Fox really likes to blatantly give us spoilers in a way that is not a spoiler until you know what it's talking about. Like how in Chapter 3, you see the flower cut in half being a spoiler or foreshadowing of Flowery getting cut in half and all that stuff. So that's also why I think Chris reset the timeline in Chapter 6 instead of Chapter 7. Because Gerson said the story stopped being written after Chapter 6. So I think what is going to happen is at the end of Chapter 6, we are going to confront Image Friend, and he is going to attack Chris. The reason why I think Image Friend is finally going to attack Chris was something that confused me at first, until the new dialogue with Pink came out. And, well, it was something that I had to think about. So, Pink says that Image Friend is a coward, and does not attack unless you are alone. And that confused me, because I'm like, we ran into Image Friend in Chapter 2, and we were alone. Why didn't it attack us? And then after thinking about it some more, I realized we weren't alone. Chris and the player count as two. So Image Friend didn't see us as alone, so it didn't attack. I think in Chapter 6, Chris is going to be separated from the soul, and Image Friend is going to attack. And Chris is not going to win. I think Chris is going to get taken away, and all that's going to be left is the soul, and that is going to be how the soul finds its way to Susie, and that is what leads to Susie stabbing Chris and saving the world by killing Chris and ending the hyperdeath plot. And obviously to end it and save it, you need to find the twisted sword, find a way to make the twisted sword, and have it so that way when Susie stabs Chris, she injects him with the soul instead of killing him. As for what Chapter 7 is, I got no fucking idea. And not only do I got no fucking idea, I'm still not entirely convinced that Chapter 7 is going to be the last chapter. I still think there might be a secret Chapter 8 that only shows up in the true ending. Because it seems as if there are two Dark Worlds that are unaccounted for. Well, two Dark Worlds left if we assume that Chapter 6 is the hospital. And that is obviously, one, the shelter, But then the other one, I think there's a dark world at the bottom of the lake. And that feels weird. It feels weird that there are 3 dark worlds left, despite there only being 2 chapters. Now, you could obviously say that it's not chapter 8, it's chapter 7, side B, or side C, or whatever it's going to be. Like, it's just chapter 7, but a little bit different. I think that for true ending, it is going to be straight up its own chapter. For Snowgrave, I think that we are going to enter into the dark world in the bottom of the lake, and that's how that happens. But I think that I think Chris is going to get the soul ripped out. But there is something I have kind of neglected to mention, and that is Ralsei. I brought up that I thought in the original timeline Ralsei didn't exist, and that that was just kind of, and then I just kind of brushed it away. But I didn't talk about anything else of Ralsei besides that I think he's the embodiment of hope, trying to bring Chris and Susie together. I didn't say why. I didn't say where he came from. I didn't say what I think he is. There was parts I left out. And that is because I think Ralsei was made intentionally by Azrael and Des in order to help Chris, in order to try and get, like, I think Azrael knows what's going on the entire time. And he is trying to help Chris in a way that allows Chris to still have hope, to still allow Chris to us, like the singular Azrael sibling, to have hope, to fight back, to essentially still have the same feelings that we had when we were saving him. And the way he's doing that is to put in something. He put something into the closet in Castletown, the primordial darkness that created Ralsei. I think there was a little bit of a backfire, though. I think he was not expecting the person to make the primordial dark world to be most likely, and why I think more than anything else, Des is the most likely candidate for being the knight, is that Ralsei was probably intended to be like a big, cool older brother figure for Chris, and ended up being a little adorable dork. The reason I think that is because since the person who makes the dark world shapes what gets made in it, if Ralsei was intended to be Azrael, and Des was the one that made that fountain, Ralsei is how Des sees Azrael. And when you look at Ralsei like that, so much about his design makes sense. So much of everything going on with him makes sense. It's why he's got these beady little eyes that turn into these like super detailed pretty boy eyes when he takes off his glasses. It's because that's how Des sees Azrael's eyes. Ralsei is like an overly cartoonish explanation of Des's feelings for Azrael. Even to the point where something I noticed but never really, I can't remember if I ever really brought it up. Ralsei, with his hat on, looks like a Christmas tree covered in garland. So Ralsei being Azrael created by Des makes sense if he's like a little Christmas tree Azrael that's constantly trying to be like, oh, I'm just a cute little dork, because that's how Des sees Azrael. And so Ralsei was made specifically to fill Chris with hope, to push Chris forward, to find a way to win, to beat the prophecy, because Azrael saw what was going on, and Azrael wants to help Chris, but he doesn't just want to step in and take care of everything himself, because he knows if he does, Chris won't really be good. You know, Chris needs to win on his own, and Azrael knows that, so Azrael set up something to help him. And that's what Ralsei is. And that's also that is also what How to Draw Dragons is. That is Azrael trying to get Chris to not give up on falling in love with Susie. Because something I stupidly forgot to mention is that the entire thing of Deltarune being Undertale but backwards, every single character in Deltarune is accounted for in Undertale, either from being indirectly mentioned or shown in the 10th anniversary thing like Bardley was. Except for one character. Except for Susie. I think Azrael manipulated fate to get Susie to come to hometown because she's the only one that can act outside of the events of Undertale and the pathway that's bringing it down on. So she needs to be the one to do all that. I think something that helps that a lot is the fact that Susie seems to be being set up to be a protagonist figure in both the sense of how important she is to the story and more of like tropes for protagonists. Like in the classroom, usually the protagonist is the one that sits in the back of the class. Chris doesn't sit in the back of the class, he sits in the middle. Susie's the one that sits in the back of the class. Another trope is that the protagonist tends to have like everyone fall in love with them. Everyone falls in love with Susie, not Chris. Susie is also the new girl to town, coming in, not really doing anything. Susie has all this character development. So it seems like Susie is being lit up to be a protagonist. It just at the same time doesn't feel that way to us, or feels noticeable to us because of how much is going on with Chris, with how much is going on with us, that Chris still feels like the protagonist too. So there is that jointed level of being the most important character of the theory, because Azrael essentially saw, because since Azrael and Chris technically have power over timelines and stuff like that, Azrael would have seen, more or less, when Chris reset the timeline, he would have seen Chris falling in love with Susie. So he didn't want Chris to give up on that. So he manipulated the storyline to try and help Chris still fall in love with Susie and not just give up on all that. As for what the final confrontation is going to look like, I don't fucking know. It is probably something super obvious that has been described to us, especially with the reverse thing, and especially with me saying like, oh, it's probably Chris is going to get hyperdeathed. I don't think that's going to be the final boss, though. I do not think it's just going to be, oh, you save Chris the end. I think there's going to be one more fight after that. I don't know if it's going to be against Eram. I don't know if it's going to be against Gaster. I don't know if it's just going to be against like image friend mother or something where it's just like a bigger one than all the other ones. I have no idea what the finale could look like. Other in the true ending. In regular ending, it's probably going to be Chris dies. In Snowgrave, it's probably going to be Susie dies, getting killed by Chris and Noelle. But as for how the true ending is going to end, I don't know. I just don't know. it feels like we have all the information to figure it out, but I don't know. And so that is kind of why I wanted to talk about all this stuff. So that one, my theories and thoughts on this game going forward for the last 2 chapters I record are understood better. And also because I wanted to, I guess. I didn't really need a good reason, I just kind of wanted to. But that being stated, I don't think we're going to see Azrael until the finale again. I don't think Azrael's going to show up. I really don't. It bums me out. I want to talk to him. I want to hang out with Azrael. I want to see bro again. He's not coming back until the credits. And only in the true ending, most likely. He is being built up as too important for him to have not shown up at this point, for him to actually end up showing up at some point. He's not coming back. But when we do win, when we do find that true ending, we're going to see him again. And I'm going to beat his ass for being a smug little prick. I guess another thing I should mention right before I end this, since I am about to end this, I think, technically speaking, we may have a choice for who Chris ends up with romantically. I think we will get to choose between Susie or Noelle. Personally, my money's towards Susie. Like I definitely see how people could like Chris and Noelle. I definitely see how people could like Chris and Noelle and Susie still. Even though a lot of it seems to be being set up to be like, oh, they don't actually like each other. Noelle is just infatuated, and it's all being forced. I could still see how people like that ship. I personally want Chris and Susie together because it seems like the one that works the most. Susie is the fucking goat, which is hilarious to call Susie the goat when there's like 5 characters that are actual literal goats at this point, and she's not any of them. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to talk about. So on that note, I will end it here. One more thing I should probably mention. I don't want this to be viewed as. That's another thing. Just to reiterate, in case I didn't say at the beginning, whenever I'm talking about like, oh, I'm talking to these people and I'm like, oh, I have these things that they don't, or like I think they're doing it wrong. I'm not trying to be like a dick about that. Because like I said, you guys have been around this series significantly longer than I have. So anything I say that goes against what everyone else says makes me feel like a dick. So I want it to be clear that I'm not doing that to say like you guys are wrong, you guys don't know what you're talking about, and I do. I wanted to say like this is what I think based on how I've played it. So that way, if I am super far in the wrong about all of this, it can be explained why I had that thought process. It can be explained why I'm viewing the game the way I'm viewing it. And if I am right, or if I do have something that sounds like it could be correct, but not enough information is being presented, I want to try and encourage the people who know more than me, who dig deeper into this, who have a better connection to this, to dig into what I say to see if there's any viability. So I think I know how chapter 6 is going to go down, and I'm worried. I want Chris to win, man. I want to win. Chris needs a win. Just let him end up with the fucking dragon girl, please. Just give him that. I don't care if he's a fucking all of his limbs cut off quadriplegic that can't move or anything. As long as him and Susie end up together, I will be happy. Just give Chris the fucking win, man.